Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Monday, the 21st of January, comes to you from London. And the markets were up quite strongly on Friday. The news this morning, the main thing is the numbers out from China, which were strong at 6.5%, but for GDP, most countries would only ever dream of such a GDP number, but disappointing. And the lowest number for a few decades. So it'll be interesting to see how the Chinese market takes that in its stride. It's actually up this morning. Looking at the dollar, first of all, we see the dollar is just creeping into this long-term territory, so it is looking more and more bullish on the longer-term chart all the time, although we do still have these short-term targets on the 60-minute point and figure chart. Remembering this is my long-term, my medium-term, and my short-term at the bottom, weekly, daily, 60 minutes. So I get a multi-trend view of what's going on in the market plus all the targets, and we see really that the dollar is still holding its strength. The euro is actually up this morning, but it's weaker against the dollar on that long-term chart we see here. We're just wandering into bearish territory, and we are in downtrends on all three, about to activate a downside target of 110. So we haven't yet done that on the short-term chart, so we need to keep an eye on that. If you're trading the currencies, look at the 1-minute data as well. Japanese yen, we're seeing trading higher, the dollar trading higher here, so that's always a bit of a lead indicator. The dollar looking strong there. Sterling looking weaker against the pound, just falling this morning. We do have upside targets on the short-term chart, but downside targets are really still hanging over us on the sterling chart. And against the euro, sterling is down this morning as well. And against the Swiss franc, we're lower, and against the Aussie dollar, we're also just a bit lower as well. Bitcoin continues to fall. We see here on the Bitcoin charts that we're bearish on all three time frames, really in the doldrums at this $3,500 level, a far cry from where we were a year ago, near $20,000. Looking at the S&P 500 index, we were up over 1% on Friday, and the Nasdaq index also higher. We're not yet bullish on the medium term. We need to take out that December high to really feel confident of recovery here. The recovery is underway, but it's still at risk of making a lower high and then a lower low. That number we saw at the low of December, those are the critical levels for the US markets. The same with the Dow. We've got obviously the low that we made in December and the high that we had at the start of December. We had a very big fall away in December, so it'll be interesting to see whether we can get back above that 26,000 level on the Dow. Of course, the short-term chart looking bullish, and we do have upside targets. Long-term upside targets not quite there. The Russell 2000 index, the broader-based US market, is looking strong on the short-term chart as well. We've got an upside target of 6%, 4% on the medium term, but we are still in bearish territory, so it'll be interesting to see. The futures this morning, the S&P future down just over 1/3%, the Nasdaq down just under 0.5%, does suggest that the US market will open lower. The UK market is up this morning, up 0.25%, so it's continuing to look quite good on the short-term chart, but lots of work to do on the medium and long-term charts. And the mid-caps in the UK just down very, very slightly, 0.01% down. So we are seeing a fairly muted reaction in the market. The DAX down 1/3%. And the CAC Courant down 0.16%. Again, bullish on the short-term chart, but medium and long-term still bearish. Japan sitting up 0.5%, the weaker yen helping there. And we do have quite a few upside targets here, about 8% higher. So Japan is looking better, but again, medium and long-term charts. Nearly all these charts are looking bearish in the medium and long-term. One exception being the Hang Seng. We're starting to see a recovery in that medium term back into a bullish trend, a recovery trend there. We're not quite showing that on the short-term chart. We've got upside targets of 3 and 5%, 10% and 19%. That one not yet activated. But the Hang Seng is looking like a recovery situation. China, the Shanghai index, not quite the same. We haven't got upside targets. We've got a little one there, but still these big targets hanging over us in the Chinese market, and clearly in a bearish territory, although we have seen quite a good recovery in January. It'll be interesting to see how China takes these numbers in its stride over the coming days. The Sensex also making this medium-term recovery as well, so that's quite interesting that we are just starting to see some recovery in the Asian markets. The Aussie market not quite there. Looking at Brent crude, we're down very slightly this morning, but we're sitting at $62.51. This is the strong quarter for Brent. We would expect to see a bit of a recovery going on here. Will we get back to the $85 level? Hard to see that at the moment, but we should have a strong performance in Q1. We normally do. The seasonality suggests that. Brent, WTI, similar picture, upside targets here. No really big upside targets on the medium term and long term charts, but we do have 4% upside on the short term chart. US nat gas sitting at $3.33, and if we look at gold, gold sitting at $1278. So falling away, that stronger dollar not helping, and we are just seeing gold in bearish short term territory. It would be interesting to see. We're locking a long-term column here. If we go higher, then we activate that column. But $1,300 just seemed to be a level too much for gold at the moment. Silver also just pushing lower. US 10-year yield sitting at 2.79%, so we've seen a little bit of an improvement there. So that's good news. And looking at the German bond market, we see here bonds just pushing a little bit lower. Tech stocks, looking at Apple was up 0.6%, Alphabet, Google was up 0.7%, Facebook up 1.17%. They may be heading for oversold and recovery. They're starting to look a little bit better on that medium-term chart. We still do have these very big long-term targets hanging over as Facebook had a dire year, and Amazon up 2.9%, 0.18%. So this data all coming from Thomson Reuters Icon, or if you're a private user, Metastock Zenith. But for the stocks themselves, I'm looking at Google Finance. So this is a good free data source into your Updata system. You could use any data feed, of course, but here we're looking at Google Finance. We see a sea of green in Asia. We see Europe in a sea of red. So those markets contradicting each other, and it'll be interesting to see how the US opens. Just taking a look at the Nasdaq, we looked at the majors there. We did have Western Digital up 7%. These big moves were really driving the Nasdaq on Friday. But interesting, the stocks that have been in terrible downtrends. Look at this relative to the Dow Jones index, down by half versus the index last year, recovering. So the worst performers showed some pretty big results. We're seeing that across the charts. The downtrend stocks actually doing quite well, but again, you're trading against the trend. JD actually looking like it might just come through. On the downside, we had Tesla down very heavily on Friday, so they fell away quite sharply. Still outperforming the market, but that was a big fall for Tesla, so interesting to see that. Netflix also down nearly 4%, and Express Scripts, which has been one of the better looking stocks holding on to its trends, down 3.6%. So interestingly, the stocks that have been quite good performers were the ones that were hit on Friday. The ones that have been poor performers were the ones that went up on Friday. Looking at the Aussie market, just clicking on the Aussie 200, Pac Group up 7%. So again, poor performer, putting in a strong, looking like it might be just a recovery here. And we've got upside targets. TPG Telecom up 4.8%. Ausdrill, they've been again making some quite good counter trend moves, but a bit early to recall the recovery here. Massive underperformance last year. Looking at the poor performers, Sims Metal Management, they were down 16%. That chart looking terrible, making new lows. And again, looking at Afterpay, Touch Group, again, just starting to look a little bit better, even though they were down. So looking at China, we see here the Chinese market was quite a few stocks up. And fewer stocks down, reflecting the rise there. Much the same with Hong Kong, just ranking there. We see some stocks up 5%, so a big driver there. The Nifty 50 in India, again, a mixed picture there. We had Reliance indices up 4.5%. These are the prices coming in live from Yahoo Finance. We had Hero Co-op down 3.5%. They're still looking pretty bearish there as well. And the Nikkei 225, again, a lot more stocks up than down. Mitsui up 5.8%, but the chart looking pretty terrible. Just looking across to Europe, and if we look at first of all the FTSE 100, the big changes this morning: Whitbread up 1.2%, NMC up 1.23%. That Whitbread chart quite interesting, looking pretty bullish with good upside targets. They've really bucked the trend. They've outperformed the Dow Jones by 23% over the past year, so that's looking pretty good. And TUI down 1.2%. So again. Um, uh, Recovering off a very bad year. Kingfisher down 4% today, so they're not looking so good, and looking pretty bearish on the charts with downside targets. And Antofagasta also lower, M&S down 2%, retailers and mining being hit. We even see Tesco down 1.4%. So we're seeing quite a lot of falls still across the board. FTSE 250, if we look there, we've got Superdry up 3% after the bad year they've had. Same with Thomas Cook. We're seeing this theme that the stocks that had really bad performances and are in downtrends are the stronger performances intraday. And again, just looking at Renishaw, we're down here, just turning bearish on the long-term chart. Hammerson have been hammered, so to speak, and we're seeing the price lower there. William Hill also lower. JD Sports has been a good recovery for the last several weeks, but again they're down quite heavily today, down 2%. Looking across to Europe in the Euro Stock 600, Air France KLM up 3.9%, Ryanair up 2.8% after their profits warning last week, and we're seeing Fraport even up 2.8%. And then Henkel on the downside down 5%, Kingfisher and Hammerson, William Hill, all UK stocks featuring in those downtrends. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.